Hello and welcome. This video is a recording of some slides in a presentation I gave to empower economic development people and how they can look differently at the funding of startups and helping the innovation champions that may very well live in their area thrive. My name's Paul Niederer and I'm the CEO of a Queensland-based company called ASOB International. And our area of operation is in the equity-based crowdfunding, investor aggregation and collaborative funding area, meaning we group lots of people together into an opportunity so that investment results and of course the eventual job creation and that follows. We've raised around $150 million for 320 startups over the last 10 or so years, and according to the World Bank report, we're the oldest equity crowdfunding platform in the world. Now, the overriding theme of this presentation today is the shift we're going from a centralized operation. That means you went to a big bank or you went to an authority or a centralized operation to get any type of product or service to a decentralized one. And we are in the process now of moving even further to what's called a distributed one, and more about that later. But if we go back thousands of years, it was only kings and pharaohs and emperors who had the ability to solve large-scale problems. They had the means and the resources and the power to be able to do that. If we go back just 100 years or so ago, this power had already expanded to industrialists who built the transport systems and the financial institutions we use and are very proud of today. Now, up until very recently, if somebody wanted to go to borrow money or to fund an enterprise, this is the type of image they got. They got a person that sat behind a desk that had a Rolodex that checked through and said, yes, I've got the perfect investor for you. So whether or not it was an investment banker, or an institution, or a VC, or an angel investor, or private equity, that's pretty much what we saw. But in that trend that we're moving from centralized to decentralized to distributed, what's happening is already in the decentralized space, that's where what you could say collaborative and crowdfunding are growing up. And so if I think of it in terms of your own economic development jobs, what you have to do is, one of the most important things you have to do is recognize and support and embrace this change, this move from centralized to decentralized. And one of the speakers at the conference we're at was highlighting the pivot principles, and those are the open data, the real world context, and the informed visualization that goes with these trends. And there'll be more about that a bit later on as well. But if we go back 150 years ago, venture investors and entrepreneurs, they congregated locally. If there was a new steam train route to be built, or a new harbor, or a new something, they gathered around and the entrepreneurs talked to the funders, and business was done. And at one stage, there were as many as 15 stock exchanges throughout Australia. And those stock exchanges were the ones that basically functioned on matchmaking buyers, investors, and entrepreneurs. But eventually, the market got involved in this, the ability to trade shares. And once you get into that, it's a lot more efficient to have one huge big exchange than 15 smaller ones. So the funding aspect of it got dwarfed by the ability to sell and market and virtually gamble the shares on a stock exchange. Now, what this meant was that today, if you take the 1.2 trillion or so transactions, dollars going through the ASX, only 5% of those actually end up in money that is invested in entities in the form of rights issues or IPOs or things like that. So it's sad, but that's a complete reversal to what it probably was when these guys were standing around the trees pitching their opportunities. So this brought centralization, and centralization brought efficiencies and that, but it didn't help regional funding. It didn't help areas where people didn't want to go to the big cities, or they didn't want to actually sit down in front of a desk and chat with somebody like that. But those times are changing, because what we're seeing are two very strong trends. We're seeing, first of all, a trend of technical disruption, where the entrance of the internet into the private capital formation process is making big inroads. And so new efficiencies are being realized and old systems are being obsoleted. Now, in tandem with this, there is also a cultural disruption. As one person said to me the other day, that the children of the family office or the parents that set it up, they don't actually want to invest in the same things as their mum and dads. And that mirrors this cultural disruptive trend, which is a desire to connect more meaningfully with the things we buy, the things we do, and the things we invest in. Now, at the intersection of those, that's where investor aggregation is occurring, or funding aggregation, or whatever, but it's generally called crowdfunding. And in that intersection, there's a lot of platforms in that have evolved from that, whether you probably are familiar with Kickstarter and Indiegogo and maybe Crowdcube and a few other ones. And of course, there are some Australian platforms at that level. And for reward, we've got a platform called Possible, which has done very, very well as an Australian platform with an international presence. We've also got Society One, which is a peer-to-peer lending platform. And in the equity space, of course, we've got ASOB, or the Australian Small Scale Offerings Board, that stood the test of time, that for 8 to 10 years has been operating. And in the area of collaborative funding, where you might have people putting their sweat and labour and goods, or maybe it's government grants or government funding or different ways for a large infrastructure project to be funded, then a collaborative type funding is a platform which Sim Australia works with. Now let's go back to the original premise to see how we can help startups and innovation champions take advantage of this new world and thrive. And from all my experience, I've seen that it's really broken up into these areas. On the left there, you've got building compelling investment opportunities. First of all, you've got to have something that people want to invest in. And then up the top, you see, then you have to aggregate contributors or investors. You have to get them together. And you usually use a platform to do that. But you've got to do it in a compliant manner. You've got to do it in a way that people feel that they can trust what's happening to their money. And then, of course, you've got to achieve successful raises. Now, if I think of you most of all in economic development, the majority of you are probably involved in this first stage, building compelling investment opportunities. And that means a lot of people are assisting people to build investment plans or business plans or cases or things like that. But as we're moving from a decentralized to a decentralized market, then it has to be a lot broader than this, the ecosystem and the structure to assist companies in your region and what you're doing. So I'm going to look at 4 ways in this presentation now to help innovation champions get funded and thrive. First of all, how you can assist them to build their story, team and supporters. Secondly, ensure that they pitch to the right audience. Thirdly, assist them to get to the right funding platform. And fourthly, you'll have to redefine your own roles as we move from a centralized to a distributed economy. So let's look at the first one, assisting them with their story, team and supporters. Now you see there 3 circles. The story one is linked to the supporters and the supporters to the team and likewise. And that is because the story has to be relevant to the supporters. The people that are putting money in or supporting, it has to be relevant to them. They have to believe in it and the story must have clarity. In terms of the team, well, they're going to have to be grounded because you have to actually believe, but they also have to be enthusiastic. But most of all, they've got to have the credibility to work with people, supporters that believe in them and say, yes, we think these guys, if we give them $30,000 or whatever, they'll be able to take that and turn it into something worthwhile. But they also have to be capable. And so they have to be capable on delivering of the promise of the story. So let's drill down a bit more on this and have a look in terms of this. What I normally do when somebody comes in with an opportunity, I score them out of 10. The story out of 10, the supporters out of 10, and the team out of 10. So if you've got an opportunity that's 26, 27, 28, 29, 30 out of 30, then you know there's a good chance that's going to get funded. So first of all, you've got to build a convincing, compelling and credible story. And it's a bit like if you're standing at your barbecue and you're talking to people and they say, oh, what are you up to at the moment? You say, oh, look, I wouldn't believe I'm starting my own company and this is what it's doing. And so if they say to you, well, God, you've got to keep us posted. That sounds fantastic. We'd like to be part of it. Then you know that you're on the right channel there. And so some of the questions you might ask people like that are, so what is your story and what problem are you solving? And who cares enough to write a check? So that's the story part of it. And then, of course, you have to have a balanced, passionate, capable, and likable team. And the type of thing you say there is like, who will help you and how will they do it and what will you need and things like that. So they get a picture of the type of people that are going to be built around there. Now, the balanced means you've got to have both the people that are capable of designing and creating the products, but also about selling and managing them. So it's not just the nerd or not just the person that's developing it. In terms of, you've also got to have the passion. You've got to have people that are passionate and also people that are capable and also people that are likable. So that's putting your team together, and that's another 10 out of 10. Now, in terms of, if we look at Apple, for example, when we had Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in the early days when they were working out of a garage, they had just themselves in the middle there, and it says that they attended Stanford and Reed College and attended University of Colorado and University of California. It didn't say they graduated, didn't say anything else, but that was them. That was the genius and the brilliance was in those two people. But around them, they wrapped a team. You'll see Makila, who was chairman of the board and VP of marketing, and he'd worked for Fairchild Semiconductors. Or right down at the bottom, Gene Carter of dealer marketing that had worked for National Semiconductor, Fairchild Semiconductor, and a number of different companies. So they built around Apple Computer for their preliminary confidential offering memorandum a good team. Now, the second point is you've got to ensure that they pitch to the right audience. Now, that's very, very important, that you actually, when you're pitching, you are pitching to the right people. And it sounds very simple, but what you'll find that a lot of people can come up to you and say, well, look, we've pitched this over 100 times and we've never really got anywhere or got any funding. And it's probably because even though there's lots of people that found that they can then share their story with, they have to know that which are the right people, who cares enough to write the check, who can they interact with. Now, in the old days, of course, you could walk up to a VC or somebody behind their desk in that centralized structure or a bank and you'd get the money. But as we move towards this more decentralized days, there are different types of investors, a huge breadth of people that can invest. And if we look at this, we can see that bottom left, you can see where a lot of early stage funding comes from. Friends, family, fans, customers, subscribers, people like that are around the entity. And often it's an emotionally based system. So if we look at this picture, on the left axis is the return that people expect. How much, if I put my money in, do I expect to get back? And it's from 0 to 10 times. Now, if we look at the bottom axis, that's the degree of rational figures behind it. So in the beginning, it's just a hope and a prayer. But as you move further along and you get customers, get your first paying customer, your first profitable customer, your first export, you get rationally based figures. You actually get numbers. And that's why you can see the bank, they're not so interested in the exit, but they want the numbers. They're in that bottom right. And then the top right, we've got the people that want to have like a 10 times exit, but they also want to have the numbers to back it up. So they're very much in investment bankers, institutions, VCs, angel investors, private equity. They're up in that top right. So if you're going to be pitching, you're going to make sure that your opportunity has got a clear exit with the number of times multiple you expect to get, plus all the numbers to back it up. Otherwise, there is no point knocking on the doors of any of those people in that top right. If we look at what's happening in what you could call equity crowdfunding or retail unaccredited investor crowdfunding, and that's where mums and dads and people that you know and customer suppliers, people like that invest, often it's in this circle. It means that the exit is probably going to be 3 or 4 times your money back eventually, and you haven't really got the numbers to back that up, but it's a hunch. I know them, I want to support them, they come from our town, that sort of thing. That's the area that they sit in. Now, in that top area, of course, that's where a lot of people believe you pitch. That's where you get the money. But many, many opportunities are a long way from being ready to pitch in that area. So they've got to do some more work. And that's where you and your jobs have to help them get more work. And so when we move from the centralized one to a more decentralized, you've got to provide an infrastructure and that to carry them along that particular journey towards getting funded. So It might mean that you've got to change your skill base from just writing business plans to actually providing the pathway and the network to link the people together that can move them up into that top right sector so that it can get funded. Now, if we look at the Australian regulations of where we're going, the crowdsourced equity funding proposed regulations are fair and truly set right in the middle of that top right. And probably because of the upfront costs with AFSL licenses and things like that, the raises have to be between 600k to 5 million, and they've got to be rationally based. They have to have the numbers to make it stack up, and they have to be a public company. So that's where you see the differences. If we go to that bottom left, the 50k to 1.2 million is where startups and SMEs resides, and probably most of the companies that you are dealing with. So in terms of looking at what is needed to get a framework to raise capital, you've got to, of course, have protection for the investors. The regulators got to be able to do their job. The platform's got to be able to make money out of it, and capital has got to be raised for the business. But in Australia, we're pretty much stuck at making sure it's right for the regulator and a bit of protection for the investors and the incumbent financial services regime. So we've got to shift that to the right to make it easier for platforms to function and easier for businesses to get capital. Now, the third way is to assist them to get to the right funding platform. Now, if they just want pre-sales, they want to test it in the market, they want to sell some product in advance, they want to get some feedback on features and things like that, then a reward crowdfunding like Possible is perfect. If it's a straight debt transaction, then something like Society One is workable. If it's equity, if it's up to $5 million and they're going to exchange shares in their entity for equity, then it's the Australian Small Scale Offerings Board in terms of that equity funding area. And if it's a government infrastructure project where there's many, many different players, then it'll be something like Sim Australia that would be able to do that job. So the fourth one of this, the four ways to help these people, was to define your own roles as we move from a centralized to a distributed economy. And I mentioned earlier on that just helping them do business plans and things like that isn't often enough these days, because you have to provide that bridge towards all of the things that are available in a decentralized structure. And that means that you actually have to embrace all of these different areas. So let's do a wrap up on where we're at. If we're thinking of, okay, I'm going to assist entrepreneurs to connect with innovators, what am I going to do? Recognizing that the world is changing, that data, open data and the sharing of information is universal now, and people want transparent access to the data and information. And also, people want things to be in a real world context. They want it to be so that they can understand it and see it fitting into how things are around like that. And the third thing, of course, the principle of the pivot principles, is there has to be informed visualization, meaning they have to be able to easily see the trends and the pictures that are coming out of the numbers. So a first starting point is to recognize that we're moving from a centralized to a decentralized to a distributed system, and you have to support and embrace that change and make sure that you, within it, allow for open data, allow people to share the data and findings you've got. And also through that data and through modeling and things like that, show entrepreneurs in a real world context that their business fits well here because of a number of reasons that fit their particular type of business. And of course, do it in a way that's informed and shows them the numbers in a way that's truly beneficial. As a small example, I can show you an alternative I've put forward in terms of equity crowdfunding. Instead of ASIC and your accountant and yourself and all sorts of people having your records and having duplicate share registers and things like that, all of these people could put through an open, shared, fully transparent, zero-cost, trust-based transactional recording and reporting environment that could be up in the sky. So if you issued some shares to somebody, then immediately it would be registered in the same place so that somebody could check up if they had the shares or not. And also the regulator could have special programs running to see that if things got out of control and there were too many shares being sold in a particular entity or whatever. And that's the idea of what you call a distributed system. Instead of the regulator owning all the information about companies and things like that, it's actually shared and it's transparent and it's accessible, and there's trust layers in there so that if I transfer a share to you, then it's encrypted as mine, and once you get it, then it's encrypted as yours. And so that's the future in terms of like a fully distributed system, but we're part way there. So we saw that there's a technical disruption going on and a cultural disruption. At that intersection is where these crowdfunding platforms go on. In order to get funded, you have to have the story, you have to get the supporters, you have to get the team together and get the story up to about 30 points out of 30 for the three of those things, so that then they're okay and they're able to raise capital. We saw that pitching and the level at which you pitch something is very important. If it hasn't got the numbers, but it's a great idea and people are passionate about it, then it's going to be for family, friends, fans, customers, subscribers. But if it's got the numbers and it's got a good exit, then it's going to be good for investment bankers. Of course, you've got to choose the platform, and there's many, many platforms around, and realize that in the whole process of raising capital, there are a number of definite steps involved. Building a compelling investment opportunity, making sure you have processes and systems to aggregate investors. It's not shotgun blasts out with your document to hopefully get somebody. You have to aggregate them and you can gather them. So as economic development professionals, you have to work out ways in which you can aggregate people that are interested in the particular technology your particular area of the world is famous for, and nurture them and grow them so that when the investment opportunity comes along, you can match them. And then make sure within your region or area you've got platforms that can do things in a compliant manner to make sure these people can get through the process as easily as possible. And of course, assist them in marketing and achieving successful fundings so that they can move on. So thank you for listening to that. I consult to a number of organisations and governments internationally on how to structure startup and innovation funding portals, investor aggregation process and regulations to successfully manage with transparency and governance. So please reach out to me if you have any questions, and I do trust you enjoyed the presentation. Thanks very much.